With around 8,500 built, the Panzer IV was one of the most numerous of all the German armored vehicles during the Second World War. While the majority of these are ones you are no doubt at least somewhat familiar with, such as the original Panzer IVs armed with the short 75mm cannon, as well as the later variants with the longer and more powerful 75. However, being the workhorse of the Wehrmacht, it should come as no surprise that this resulted in quite a few odd designs being built using the chassis. Today, we will look at 10 of these, and just like with my last video like this on Shermans, let's make things a little bit more interesting with a wager. This time, what I want you all to do is go ahead and hit the like button right now, and if by the end of the video I haven't introduced you to at least one Panzer IV you haven't seen before, you can take your like back. Otherwise, I win and get to keep it. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into our list, and if you see any that you find particularly interesting, keep an eye on the corner of the screen, as whenever I cover these vehicles in a dedicated video, I will add a card there so you can learn the entire story.
Here we go!
Starting out in no particular order, we have one of the more well-known weird Panzer IVs with the hydrostatic Panzer IV. While from the front this looks like any other later model Panzer IV, when you come around to the back, it's quickly clear that something isn't quite right. The rear of the hull has a more rounded shape, which was designed to hound a Thoma hydrostatic drive. If you've ever operated something like a zero-turn lawnmower or skid steer, you will be at least somewhat familiar with how this would work. Rather than relying on gears or other power delivery methods, the tracks would be powered by hydraulic fluid, with the engine powering the hydraulic pumps. Only a single prototype with this was completed, and it survives today, with it currently residing in the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection in Georgia. Up next, we find another almost normal-looking Panzer IV, that is, if you ignore the unusual weapon crammed into its turret. Information on this vehicle is quite scarce, but from what I can find, it found its way into the possession of the Bulgarians following World War II. Only one of these is known to exist, with it being positioned alongside other Panzer IVs as stationary defenses along the Bulgarian border. Remarkably, it has survived to this day, and according to one article, it was set to be auctioned off before the auction was cancelled, and it was instead kept as part of the Museum of Battle Glory collection. Hopefully this will mean that it remains in this unique configuration instead of being reverted back, as so often happens with rare examples of tanks such as this. While the Panzer IV's sibling, the Panzer III, would see far more use for self-propelled guns, with the Stugs being built on that chassis, the Panzer IV did not escape that fate entirely. While you might think I'm referring to the Stug 4, the one I have actually chosen for this list packs a much bigger punch. The 10.5cm Kanonen gepanzert Selbstfahrerfette, more commonly known nowadays as the Dicker Max, was an open-topped vehicle built on a Panzer IV chassis. Equipped with a massive 10.5cm gun, this was intended to engage heavily defended targets like bunkers. However, it would end up primarily being used as a tank destroyer, with the two examples being sent to the Eastern Front. Neither would end up surviving the war. Germany would later produce a similar vehicle known as the Nashorn, which was built on a hybrid chassis using Panzer III and IV components, as well as the experience gained from the Dicker Max in combat.
Bruh.
Sticking with the trend of upgunning the Panzer IV, we have this one, which has been modified to carry an 8.8cm cannon. While this particular example appears to be either a one-off prototype or an improvised gun carrier, the idea to mount the 88 on a Panzer IV hull came in many forms. While none of these would reach production outside of the hybrid chassis for the Nashorn I mentioned earlier, this concept was even taken to the extreme, with a blueprint for one mounting a 128mm gun. By the time these proposals were being put forward, it was more out of desperation, as production of the newer types was being seriously hindered by the advancing Allied forces and bombing campaigns. Had any of these actually reached any level of production, it is quite likely that they would have suffered similar problems to the Nashorn due to the weight of the guns on the outdated Panzer IV chassis.
Okay.
In a shocking twist, our next Panzer IV variant is another attempt to upgun the vehicle. However, this time, this was arguably a bit less outlandish, as it involved mounting the Schmalterm turret with the 7.5cm KWK 44/1L70, which was a modified version of the 7.5cm found on the Panther tank, featuring a new recoil system. This turret is most commonly associated with the Panther itself, with it being planned for the Panther F version of the vehicle, although it is also wrongly associated with the cancelled Panther II project, which I have discussed in detail in a previous video. While there is some relation between the turret of the Panther II, the Schmalterm itself came after an earlier turret design intended for that vehicle. Enough about the Panther though, as this turret was also considered for the Panzer IV. This would have granted the Panzer IV improved firepower only seen on Jagdpanzer 470 variants, as well as significant improvement to its turret armor. Similarly to the previous concepts for upgunning the vehicle though, the fact remains that this would have also come with a weight increase which the chassis would struggle with. A similar idea to simply mount the gun itself into the Panzer IV turret was also impractical, as it would have required a redesign of the turret in order to squeeze it in. It should come as no surprise that neither of these ideas ever left the drawing board. The story of the Schmalterm turret is an interesting one though, so if you'd like to see a dedicated video on that, let me know. At number 5, we finally reached the last of the upgunned Panzer IVs with the Sturmpanzer IV. This vehicle is a casemate-style self-propelled gun built on the Panzer IV chassis. 4 different production runs of these were completed, with each differing slightly in design from the previous, with a total of around 300 built, making this the most produced variant on this list by far. Featuring a 15cm howitzer and 100mm of frontal armor, these were used in a similar way to their cousin the Sturm Tiger, being used in a sort of assault gun role against fortifications and in some cases against enemy tanks. These saw reasonable levels of success, but continued the pattern of being a heavy vehicle built on the Panzer IV chassis, leading to reliability problems. As we move into the final 4, we finally reach the truly bizarre-looking designs, with the first of these being the Panzer IV with recoilless guns. Once again, this never progressed to production, but the wooden mock-up gives us an excellent look at what the final vehicle would have looked like if it had. The hull appears to be that of an early Panzer IV with a modified Panzer III turret, or at least the mantlet from one, with 2 7.5cm recoilless guns mounted on the sides. The rear of those guns is exposed to allow for the backblast outside of the vehicle, with the hatches positioned to allow them to open away from the guns to make reloading easier. As for the gun in the middle, sources indicate this to have been intended as a 30mm Mk103 ranging gun for the 7.5cm guns. While this rocket concept may not have progressed to a full vehicle, the same cannot be said for our next variant.
Wow.
The Raketenwerfer auf Fahrgestell Panzer IV, which translates to rocket launcher on Panzer IV chassis, is exactly what the name would suggest. A single prototype of this was built with a launcher turret capable of firing 4 28cm rockets. While not much is known about this project, a number of other vehicles were used throughout the war for this, including one particularly wacky idea for a towable launcher for a V-2 missile for U-boats. If I had to guess why this project failed, it likely had to do with the cost of using a Panzer IV chassis rather than using comparatively cheaper options. For our final 2 Panzer IV variants, we find not only some of the most outrageous looking ones, but also 2 which do not feature much, if any, firepower. At number 2, we have the armored ferry built on a Panzer IV chassis. This was intended to ferry tanks across bodies of water up to the weight of the Panzer IV itself. To accomplish this, 2 ferries would have a platform suspended between them, and the vehicle would be loaded onto that. While this was certainly an interesting concept, and photos show that it appeared to work as intended, the increasing mass of new tank variants quickly made this obsolete. Last but not least, we reach one of the craziest looking Panzer IVs, at least in my opinion. While at first this might look like a typical bridging vehicle, which the Panzer IV did have a variant for, this one was a bit different. Rather than carrying a bridge capable of having tanks cross, this one was intended for lighter vehicles and infantry. To accomplish this, it featured what is essentially an extendable ladder like you might see on a fire truck, which could be stretched across a river. 2 of these would be extended side by side, and then planks would be placed between them. This would allow for infantry and lighter vehicles to cross. A handful of these were built and used in the Soviet Union, although there does not seem to be much information on how they performed. So, did I introduce you to at least one new Panzer IV type, or do you get to take your like back? Let me know in the comments. If this video got you itching to learn more about even more weird Panzer IV variants, consider subscribing as I make more in-depth videos on vehicles like these regularly for the nearly 320,000 others who follow my content. However, if you just can't wait, I would recommend picking up the book Panzer IV and Its Variants by Walter J. Spielberger, which I'll drop a link to in the pinned comment below and the description, along with some other reference sources for the ones we discussed today. That's all I have for you today though, so thanks for watching, and to all my ConelyFans for their support of these videos. If you're new to the channel, check out my video on the Nashorn or whichever of my other videos YouTube thinks you'll enjoy.